Peace, family. This is your brother Jesus DiCaprio. Peace to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. First off, I want to thank the Most High Power of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is going to be the first segment of a three-part segment. And this is extensive information. So get your notepads. For all you out there, get your pens and your pencils or whatever utensils you're going to need to write this information down with. And it's going to be edifying. And we're going to get right to the point this evening. And my introduction going to tell you what it's all about and explain what I'm going into. Without further ado, the Hidden Revelation presentation by Jesus DiCaprio, myself, the mother they missed. And you will see at the end of this presentation why I called it the mother they missed. As a matter of fact, you'll see it inside the introduction. So let's go. Acknowledgements. I would like to thank and acknowledge first and foremost my power, the Most High Power of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one and only true power of the universes. Secondly, I'd like to thank the many great people who helped me strengthen my understanding regarding the traditions, customs, and spiritual beliefs systems of our people over the years, family and friends. Secondly, I'd like to thank everyone who took their time to make this information available for me to be able to share with my people today. It has indeed strengthened my faith that has confirmed what I felt many years ago. Thanks. Kwam Yah'shua. Let's go. Introduction. In this presentation, we will be exploring a topic not discussed much in our community and amongst our peers. Even some of our most decorated, admirable, and accomplished so-called African-American, Pan-African, and Afrocentric scholars have found a way to remain silent on this very sensitive topic and sometimes secretive aspect of these indigenous African traditional belief systems we shall be divulging. They could have been teaching well before I was born, as many of them were, and to whom I am grateful for and respect, but seems to either have been not truthful nor sincere in their journey in awakening the people who has been asleep for so long that if you slap them, they wouldn't feel a thing. Or they themselves have been bamboozled, hoodwinked, and set up for the woo-woo. Or maybe they simply didn't have the resources or technology as we do today, enabling us to tap into almost any library, access almost any piece of documentation or body of information at the click of a mouse pointer or at the tap of a computer keyboard key. The later notion makes a little more sense to me. They couldn't imagine that we'd be able to talk face to face with the person on the opposite side of the globe with a phone call. I think ultimately our ancestors were teaching truth as they knew it to be in their respective times and based on the information they were privy to, aware of, and acquired. I also think our ancestors didn't intend for their work to be the end all be all. I'm sure they knew there would be a young brother or young brothers like myself who will rise up and challenge the popular beliefs and opinions of those who subscribe to a system they themselves unconsciously abhor and consciously don't understand. These systems are ancient indigenous African belief systems. Though we know there are many spiritual systems throughout Africa that entails many different ways of expression, group or individual inclinations, or individual inclinations, we know there is one underlying principle that links them all. The acknowledgement, respect, and beliefs in the spirit world, life beyond the grave, the supernatural power of the gods, the supernatural and natural forces of the immaterial spirit world, and the material/physical world which they held control over and thus could interact, react, act on the behalf of, and interfere with everyday affairs of normal humans. In this presentation, I will show and prove that a lot of what we thought we knew about African spirituality is a false and incomplete narrative given to us by way of westernized minds who has lost all touch with his original self, culture, identity, traditions, religion, and power or God. Stripping African culture of its very essence, taking the scraps, watering it down, calling it African science and spirituality, and then giving it to a people, then giving it to a people who are so asleep if you slap them, they wouldn't feel it. Right? Giving it to a people who can't see past the beauty and the remnants of a great civilization that history records parallel no other during the height of its reign, which we can parade in the face of the Johnny come lately and claim our royal legacy and feel royal again. This has blinded us in search for the truth. This has been a kind of hypnotization that most African Americans allow themselves to undergo. Some claim to be initiated into or aligned with, in some form, fashion, or manner, some certain traditional indigenous African spiritual group or system. But strangely enough, almost all of their teachings, ideas, and concepts doesn't seem to lean toward a return to any known ancient traditional African system that I'm aware of, nor does it resemble anything African other than their dress, garments, cosmetics, etc. Now we shall examine the evidence, information, and accounts as told by countless African tribes and nations, experts such as Egyptologists, archaeologists, actual initiates, priests, priestess, spiritual healers, shamans, historians, the oral traditions of the people and the inhabitants of the land we call today Africa. Let's keep going. Let's jump right into it. Land of the Egyptian gods, E.A. Wallace Buzz. Right? Page 34. It was well known in Egypt and the Sudan at a very early period that if a magician obtained some portion of a person's body, e.g. hair, a part of nails, a fragment of skin, or some portion of some effluence from the body, spells could be used upon them which would have the effect of causing grievous harm to that person. So in ancient Kemet, we see witchcraft going back that far, as well as you can also get a person's picture. You can get a piece of a person's clothing. You could get anything that held the direct energy of that person, or they came in contact with. You can get that. You can get that and use that for these purposes and cast bad on somebody. So let's see about a lot of this bad that you can cause on somebody. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna let this beautiful
A girl was killed in a car accident. The drunk driver responsible was released without being punished, so the girl's parents went to Mauno to right the wrong done to her. The fetish is dressed in cloth from the driver's shirt. Mauno whispers a curse into the hole he has carved. When he plugs the hole, the curse goes into effect.
Okay, family. As we see, it gets real. As we see dolls being used. Let's see. Touch you from afar. Many spells require the use of special foodstuff, magical implements, figurines, talismans, and the like. During the Middle Kingdom, magic knives, sometimes also called apothorpaic wands, were made of carved hippo tusks and often decorated with animal depictions. And we shall be diving into that when I bring out the wands and in reference to the birth brick and women of giving birth later in the presentation. One of them carried the word cut off the head of the enemy when he enters the chambers of the children, and the spells were hoped to afford protection from snakes, scorpions, and other dangers, as well as spirits. Animal figurines were amongst the equipment of the tomb. Very popular hippo tales. Very popular hippo talismans. Hippos are fiercely protective of their young and dangerous to man. The dead were therefore frequently endowed with figurines which had a leg purposely broken off to prevent them from hurting the tomb owner. Vessel lamps, knives, and other utensils were used. Blood, semen, oil, water were mixed with other animal or plant matter. Myrrh and frankincense were buried as well as and was the Anubis plant. So we see that all these concoctions or ingredients will be concocted up or used in earlier times to put these certain spells or upon somebody, or however you wanted to do it, or to dispel evil away from you, or to send evil, or to send a reaction to the evil that was being sent at you. So we see the ingredients for the cake right there. The sources on the page. Ancient Egyptian Magazine, issue 9, November 2001. November, December 2001. Let's keep going. From Fetish to God in Ancient Egypt, E.A. Wallace Budge, page 319. And what he's going into, maybe I should start with this. Gabalion man buried with artifacts. The Gabalion man is one of 6 discovered by E.A. Wallace Budge. According to the British Museum, it was found in Thebes, by the way, 25 miles south of Thebes. According to the British Museum, the Gabalion man dates back to approximately 3500 BCE in the pre-dynastic era before the pharaohs. The dead were typically buried in sand pits in the fetal position, with pots and other goods surrounding them, necessary items for the afterlife. And now these mummies were in so great of a condition that they blew the archaeologist's mind. They blew the anthropologist's mind. They blew their minds. They just absolutely flabbergasted them. But they come to find out that they were in such good condition because of the climate or the temperature of the desert. The temperature of the desert will preserve these bodies. Now let's go back to this slide. These graves prove that the Egyptians who made them believed though the dead bodies of their kinfolks and friends were lying there in the ground close to their villages, some parts or part of the dead were still alive. They assumed that they would need food. Therefore, they offered bowls of grain, etc. They would have to fight with wild beasts or living beings who were hostile to them. Therefore, they offered them weapons wherein to fight, spearheads for their hunting spears, scrapes to scrape off the hair of the pellets of the animal they killed, stone figures of the animal which the living thought to would meet, and avalanche of flint, the crocodile horn of animals, and the Nile fish, etc. But where were these hypothetical enemies and beasts to be found? We can only assume that the Egyptians thought that their dead were going to have their being in some region or country which closely resembled Egypt, right? Right. One thing is for certain, very certain, they did not want the dead to come back. Let me read that again. They did not want the dead to come back to Egypt. For if they came back to Egypt, they would need food and so consume the stores of the living and perhaps even kill them. So we can see that they thought that these spirits needed, you had to, feeding the kind, they needed so much food that they would actually break the local stores. So if I'm a private store owner and I'm selling goods, I'm selling tomatoes, I've got crops for sale, or whatever the case may be, the spirit will want all my food. I'm going to go broke trying to keep the spirit happy. Because the spirit, you understand what I'm saying? And then the spirit, they were afraid the spirit would kill them. So this is, it's got nothing to do with spookism. It's just real, family. So, it is what it is. Let's keep going. To make certain that the dead could not return to their old haunts, to their old haunts. The Neolithic Egyptians at one time dismembered the bodies of the dead, and many of the dead have been found with their hands and their feet chopped off and their heads chopped off their bodies. Now, keep in mind that Set killed Osiris and chopped his body up and spread it all over the place. And when Isis found this out, she turned into a falcon and went and found his. She was weeping as she flew and was looking for his body parts and got them all together. The only part she couldn't find was his penis, was his phallus. You get what I'm saying? That's another story. We'll be getting into that later. Now, at one point, the dead were partially cremated and their bones scattered about the grave. Next slide. We covered that one. Next slide. Ancient Egypt in the East, page 28. Now, these are what you call soul houses, family. Now, let's see what they were used for. So much. Let's start at this part. At the earlier part of the Osirian revival, the dread of the dead coming out of the graves and haunting the villages led to modern houses being placed by the side of graves for the soul to find shelter in. These pottery models of the dwelling houses show the common buildings of the peasantry with their lower and upper floors, their fenced roofs, their air shafts, furniture, food, and the domestic druids who ground the corn. The soul, therefore, was thought of as wandering from the grave and needing shelter in a home. So we just saw that with Budge, or we're gonna get into some more of that. Let's keep going. And you see spirit houses, soul houses right here. Let's get to it. Let's get into some more of that. Egyptian magic. E.A. Wallace Budge, page 217 to 218. The popular idea which the Egyptians held about the composition of man greatly favored the belief in apparition and ghosts. Now, when we talking about ghosts, we're not talking about no spooky, mystifying stuff. We're talking about actual physical beings that's outside of this fleshly realm. So when we ain't talk about nothing in white sheets floating around like Casper. See, when a lot of our brothers and sisters have been so westernized in the mind, when we speak of spirits and ghosts, the first thing that come to their mind is Casper looking friendly, the ghost looking. That's not what we're dealing with. That's never been factual. That's TV. Get it out your mind. We're dealing with energy that can manifest. Just like everything we see in the physical manifests from what we don't see, which is the spiritual. Let's keep going. According to them, a man consisted of a physical body, a shadow, a double, a soul, a heart, a spirit called the Ku, a power, a name, and a spiritual body. And names were important in Kemet, just as they were important in the Hebrew faith. That's why we was always named after power. That's how you had El in most all our names. El meant power. Let's go. And a spiritual body. When the body died, the shadow departed from it and could only be brought back to it by the performance of a mystical ceremony. The double lived in the tomb with the body and was there visited by the soul whose habitation was in heaven. And if you look on the left-hand side of my screen, family, what we have is what you would call a Kador, ignorantly called a false door, but a Kador was so the Ba of the or the Ka of the deceased could transverse from the spiritual world to the physical world and partake in offers, eat, drink, what he will. So this is called a Kador, or what's falsely called a false door, with the Ka or the Ba could travel back and forth through. And this, you see these all over Kemet. So when people look at these, understand what you're looking at. Let's go. The soul was, from one aspect, a material thing, and like the Ka or double, was believed to partake of the funeral offerings which were brought to the tomb. One of the chief objects of the sepulchral offerings of meat and drink was to keep the double in the tomb and to do away with the necessity of its wandering about outside the tomb in search of food. So the double would wander outside the tomb in search for food. So it was prevalent, and it was crucial that one brought sufficient amounts of food to feed the double, so they would stay in the tomb. And this is why on these stelas and on these wall reliefs, you see abundance amount of food, for it looked like one person or two people. And people get that confused and say, look, they had they were dealing with redistribution of wealth. We're gonna deal with that later. Let's go. It is clear from many texts that unless the devil was supplied with sufficient food, it would wander forth from the tomb and eat any kind of offal and drink any kind of dirty water which it might find in its path. Understand that, family. Let's jump down. It says, but beside the shadow and the devil and the soul, the spirit of the deceased, which usually had its abode in heaven, was sometimes to be found in the tomb, family. This is, however, good reason for stating that the immortal part of man which lived in the tomb and had its special abode in the statue of the deceased, which is called a Ka statue. We're going to get into that later on. Which had its special abode in the statue of the deceased was the devil. This is proved by the fact that a special part of the tomb was reserved for the Ka, or the devil, which was called the house of the Ka, and that a priest called the priest of the Ka was specially anointed to minister therein. The devil enjoyed the smell of incense, which was offered at certain times each year in the tomb, as well as the flowers of herbs, meat, and drink. And the statue of the deceased in which the devil dwelt took pleasure in all the various scenes which were painted or sculptured on the walls of the various chambers of the tombs, and enjoyed again all the delights which his body had enjoyed upon earth. So understand that, family. Let's keep going. Understand that. So now, what we have here is called, this is the stela of the magic stela. This is the magic stela. Ramses II, recording Ramses II sending his gods to exorcise a demon out of someone who has a demon out of his wife's sister. In other words, his sister-in-law. Okay? So we're going to read this story, and I'm going to go into the story because I don't think too many people are aware of this. I know they seen this stela, but I don't think they actually know what's on this stela. So we're going to actually get into what's on this stela. So let's get into it, family. Egyptian Magic by E.H. Wallace Budge, chapter 7, page 207 to 213. Religion of the Ancient Egyptians by Alfred Weidman, chapter 10, page 275 to 277. So you can find bodies of this or references in both these books right here to what I'm bringing out. That's good. It said, on the occasion described, was considered to be so noteworthy that the narrative of it was inscribed on a stela and set up in the temple of the god Consul at Thebes, so that all man might read and know what a miraculous cure his priest had effected. It appears that King Ramesses was in Mesopotamia, according to his wont, year by year, and all the chiefs of the countries round about came to pay their respects to him, and they sought to obtain his goodwill and protection, probably even an alliance, by bringing him gifts of gold and lapis lazuli and turquoise and every other kind of valuable thing which the land had produced. And every man sought to outdo his neighbor by the lavishness of his gifts. Amongst others, there came a prince of Becton, and at the head of all the offerings which he presented to his majesty, he placed his eldest daughter, who was very beautiful, so he gave his daughter as an offering. When the king saw her, he thought her the most beautiful girl ever, and he bestowed upon her the title Royal Spouse Chief Lady Ra Neferu, the beautiful of Ra, the sun god, and took her to Egypt. And when they arrived in that country, the king married her. One day during the 15th year of the king of the king's reign, when his majesty was in Thebes celebrating the festival of Amarah, a messenger came to the king and reported the arrival of an ambassador from the prince of Becton, who had brought rich gifts for the royal lady Ra-Neferu. When he had been led into the king's presence, he did homage before him, saying, "Glory and praise unto thee, O thou son of the nations. Grant that we may live before thee." Having said these words, he bowed down and touched the ground with his head 3 times and said, "I have come unto thee, O my sovereign Lord, on behalf of the lady Bent et Reshit, the younger sister of the royal spouse Ra-Neferu. For behold, an evil disease has laid hold upon her body. I beseech thy majesty to send a physician to see her." The king straightway ordered the book of the double house of life to be brought and the learned man to appear. And when they had come into his presence, he ordered them to choose from among their number a man wise of heart, cunning of finger. Let's get the next slide. Cunning of finger, that he might send him to Becton. They did so, and their choice fell upon one Tehuti Heb. This sage, having come before the king, was ordered to set out for Becton in company with the ambassador, and he departed. And when they had arrived there in Egypt, the Egyptian priest found the lady Bent et Reshet to be possessed of a demon or spirit over which he was powerless. So this Egyptian priest had no power over this spirit or demon that was possessing this lady. It was so powerful. The prince of Becton, seeing that the priest was unable to afford relief to his daughter, sent once again to the king and ordered him to send a god to help. When the ambassador from Becton arrived in Egypt, the king was in Thebes. And on hearing what was asked, he went into the temple of Khonsu Neferhetep and besought the god that God allowed his counterpart Khonsu to depart to Bekhet to deliver the daughter of the prince of that country from the demon that possessed her. It seems as if the sage Tehuti Heb had been sent to Bekhen by the advice of the god, for the king says, "In addressing the god, I have come once again into thy presence." But in any case, Khonsu Neferhetep agreed to this request, and a fourfold measure of magical power was imparted to the statue. Listen to that, family. A fourfold of magical power was imparted to the statue of the god, which was taken to Becton. The god seated in his boat and 5 other boats with figures of gods in them, accompanied by chariots and horses, on the right hand and on the left, set out from Egypt, and after traveling 17 months, arrived in Becton, where they were received with gifts, great honor. The god Khonsu went to the place where Bet and Reshet was staying at, and having performed a magical ceremony over her, the demon departed from her, and she was cured straight away. So we see the priest couldn't handle it. He sent the god go there. They take the god there. Then the words is uttered around the god. You know, the spells is recited or what have you not. And the demon is lifted right out of this one. Right? So let's see what else it says. Then the demon that left out the woman, then the demon addressed the Egyptian god, saying, "Grateful and welcome is thy coming unto us, O great God, thou vanquisher of the host of darkness. Becton is thy city. The inhabitants thereof are thy slaves, and I am thy servant." So this spirit is saying, I'm your servant too, brother. See, here we see a more powerful spirit putting a weaker spirit in check. "And I will depart unto the place whence I came, that I may glorify thee. For unto this end hast thou come thither. And I beseech thy majesty to command that the prince of Becton and I may hold a festival together." To the demon's request, Khonsu agreed, and he commanded his priest to tell the prince of Becton to make a great festival in honor of the demon. This having been done by the commandment of Khonsu, the demon departed to his own place. So we see this is real, family. Ain't no fugazi. Next slide. The Egyptians, the gods of the Egyptians, E.A. Wallace Budge. Let's see. Let's jump to right here. In the text of the early Egyptians, in the early empire, the deceased is declared to be a god or God, and the son of God or God, and the oldest god of all, Horus, gives him his eye, and he sits on a great throne by the side of God. So the deceased becomes an editor. Yet in the same text, we read that he partakes of the figs and the wine of the gods, that he drinketh beer which lasts forever, that he thirsts not like the gods Shu and Tefnu, and that the throne of God is made of iron, that its legs terminate in hoofs like those of bulls, and that its sides are ornamented with the faces of lions. The great god Horus gives his own double or ka. Keep in mind, Horus, ka. If this is a force of nature, what it's doing with a ka? A ka is something that's pertaining to humans at birth. Even though we're supposedly have a ka before being in our physical bodies, it's still relating to the physical body. So this is more than just a force of nature, Horus having a ka, but that we're gonna get into that. We'll get to that a little later. The great god Horus gives his own double or ka, and yet there are in heaven enemies who dare to oppose the deceased. And although he is declared to be immortal, all the gods give him their food, that he may not die. And he sit down, clothed in white linen, wearing white sandals, with the gods by the lake in the field of peace, and partakes with them of the wood or tree of life, in which they themselves live, that they may also live, that he may also live. Though, keep in mind, family, though he is the son of God, he is also the child of Sophis and the brother of the moon, and the goddess Isis becomes his wife. Though he is the son of God, we are also told that his flesh and bones have been gathered together, that his material body has been reconstructed, that his limbs perform all the functions of a healthy body. And as he lives, as the gods live, we see that from one point of view, he and the gods are constituted alike. So let's see. That's becoming an editor. And as you can see, just to give a little commentary on this, as you can see, we're dealing with transfiguration. So when you look in the scripture and you see transfiguration dealing with Christ being transfigured and this material body being all beat up, and then he coming back in a glorified body, it's not so hard to picture now, is it, once you see it in ancient kingdom? Is it? Let's keep it moving. This is from the book Ancient Egypt in the East, pages 22 to 20 through 24. And you see Petri, all your best mans, all your biggest and baddest Egyptologists up there. You see what I'm saying? They put this is they stamped this, they approved it. So let's go. This brings us to the view of the double or ka, the relation of which to human nature has most been difficult to define, because some people don't understand today what's going on today in a lot of indigenous African spiritual systems, belief systems, what was going on back then. It's the same thing. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's the same thing. There is little doubt that there existed 7 different beliefs on this subject, revealed to us by incompatible statements of various periods. It may well be well to look at a modern African belief of a similar kind, which, having been stated in detail, may perhaps be somewhat of a guide. In Nigeria, every ordinary individual, male or female, is attended by a guardian spirit who is looked upon as a protector. Now, keep in mind, family, Bess was the protector of Horus. Bess was the protector of Horus. And Best was the protector of Pharaoh. Keep that in mind. And Best was considered a force of nature. Keep that, but we're gonna get into that. In Nigeria, every ordinary individual, male or female, is attended by a guardian spirit who is looked upon as a protector. It's invariably of the same household and with whom, when alive, personal friendships have existed. So that could be an ancestor or whatever the case may be. Every freeman is attended by a guardian spirit, usually the spirit of his own immediate father. You can see that source there. Now, this puzzling localization by which the Ka was the companion of the living, and yet the dead went to their Kas, is explained by the Nigerian belief. There, the guardian spirits attend to the living, and yet is the spirit of one who is already amongst the dead. If the Egyptian Ka was like this, an ancestral manifestation, it would thus guide the living. Yet in the future life, the dead who will go on to the Ka. It seems best to regard the Ka as an ancestral emanation which was associated with each man from birth, and by its superiority will guide them and help them through life in the next. So we saw that Horus has a Ka, and the Ka is associated with man through birth. We see that Horus actually had a protector spirit that watched over him called Bes. So let's go. Next slide. From fetish to God in ancient Egypt, E.A. Wallace Budge, page 36. And this is for people who keep comparing the Osiris with Christ. Christ resurrected from the dead. Osiris resurrected from the dead. We stole the story from Kemet. It has nothing to do with it. In fact, you can see resurrection stories from every culture on the face of the earth. So it's nothing exclusive to one culture or geographic landmass or one norm or one people or one ethnic group or one people speaking of one particular dialect. It's not. Let's go. The court of Osiris. The most striking feature of the Egyptian religion was essentially magic. Now we're dealing with the Osiris court. Listen. After a comparatively rapid but victorious progress from the Delta to Abydos, his court flourished throughout the country from the 12th dynasty to the middle of the Ptolemaic period. Its popularity was deservedly great because its promise to all its adherents the resurrection of the dead in a renewed life of indefinite duration after death, and it did away with the monopoly of gods and kings in heaven. The followers of Osiris were helped in every way, apart from the teachings of the priests. The great book, the coming forth by day, provided them with all the spells and with directions for using them, which would enable them to find their way to the kingdom of God. Osiris was raised from the dead, and his mortal body. Now here we go, Osiris being immortal. We see Osiris being immortal. And by the way, we have the mummy of Osiris. So I never knew a mummy, a force of nature, had a mummy. I never knew wind had a mummy. I never knew water had a mummy. But anyway, we're going to get into that later. Osiris was raised from the dead, and his mortal body was reconstructed and revived by magic, which we talked about. Isis, which was his wife, who and his sister, which he cut the body. His brother cut him up and spread him all around. Isis went and found the body parts and put him back together, had a baby by him, which was Horus. In other words, just like we see in African cosmology today amongst the egg whale and certain amount of, I think another African traditional group or another indigenous group that a water spirit and a human woman had a baby together, and this became one of the elders of the village. He is actually a Risha. He did fight as a Risha to this day. So that's going to be in the second segment. I'm going to bring that out. The followers of Osiris. Okay. Osiris was raised from the dead. Okay. And the world after death could attain their wish by joining him. Okay. The Egyptians died believing in Osirian magic, but there is no evidence that they regarded Osiris as a savior, or that they hoped to inherit new life after their death through any merit of his suffering and death. The idea of Osiris as a sacrifice offered up for his followers or as a redeemer finds no expression in the text. It can never have entered the minds of the Egyptians. So, and that's page 36, and I put on the side here the comparison to the Savior of Israel, Redeemer of Jacob, Messiah, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and Son of the living God of my forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has to stop. There is no comparisons. Let's get to the next slide. Return of the living dead in the Kador. Now remember, family, we was getting into this earlier about the Kador. So keep in mind when you see these doors and ancient reliefs and whatever the case may be, this is what you're dealing with. Let's get into it. The Kador, or the spirit door, is the threshold between the mortal world and the eternal space where the spirits of those who have died go to enjoy the pleasures of the afterlife. Because it was not a real door, archaeologists have chosen to call this spiritual access a false door, a rather unfortunate choice of name that lends to demean its important role. That's right. It was the Kador. It wasn't a false door. So that's right. The Kador was placed on the west wall of the offering chamber, and the west was associated with death in the afterlife. But as we see, they started placing to the east, but that's another thing. Just like with the bodies. It says, at the back of the tomb or mortuary temple, it was not unusual for a tomb to contain two false doors, one for the owner of the tomb and one for his wife. There are only a few examples within mastabas, and keep that in mind, family, mastabas, where each member of an extended family is given their own kador. Kadors are, as they allow the ka and implemented the soul to pass through them, were common in mortuary temples and tombs of ancient Egypt from around the 3rd dynasty, and temples of the New Kingdom from around the 3rd dynasty and temples of the New Kingdom. The Kador was thought to be a threshold between the world of mortals and the world of deities and spirits. The deity or the deceased could interact with the world of the living either by passing through the door or receiving offerings through it. As a result, it was not uncommon to find false doors or Kadors depicted on the side of coffins, as well as on the cabinets of swabatis or ushaptis, magical servants. Usually the decorations were undertaken in such a manner that the deceased appeared to be emerging from the false door, often included a curse emerging from the false door itself. And you can see that right here on the right hand side of the screen, family. Let's go. It says, along with the name and title of the deceased and the offering formula, the decoration of the false door often included a curse to those who would harm the deceased and a blessing to those who would make offerings. So when people talk about, y'all Israelites always talking about curses, and brother, this is real. This is real. Y'all don't understand this is real. But and keep in mind the offering formulas, because we're gonna get into that as well. Along with the name of the title of the deceased and the offering formula, the decoration of the false door often included a curse to those who would harm the deceased and a blessing to those who made offering. So I was telling you, brothers, don't be in there in Kemet running around in Egypt in them tombs if y'all ain't got nothing offering these Kas. Well, I don't even know why you want to bring food to a Ka anyway. It makes no sense to me. Let's see. For example, the false door in the mastaba of Merebeku. More examples of these can be found in the tomb of Menefer, Idu, and Neket. Neket. Remember, the tomb of Neket. I'm going to go into that. Neket. Keep in mind. This was another false door, Kador, just to name a few. And there's a source on the page, family. Oriental Institute. Let's keep going. Next slide. Here's a mastaba. Ancient Egyptian funerary architect. These are mastabas. As you see, family, you have, as you can see, family, you have here, you have the Ka, the Ka statue of the person in here. You have the sarcophagus. This is a vertical shaft. Inside, all these are connectable. This is the Ka statue of the deceased. This is a small chapel for ritual offerings here. This is an intro shaft to the altar. Now, let's go back. All right. So we see what that look like. Now, let's get it. The restless. We're gonna show that they had an understanding of the afterlife. They knew what was up, but they were just scared. All the stories about gloom lit afterlife, it wasn't so good after a while because they was getting hit to spears laying around. They're like, what the hell is going on? The Egyptians loved life longer, and the longer the better, and expressed this love in writing throughout history. In the first millennium BCE, they counted it among the four Kas, the four boons the gods bestowed upon those who lived righteous lives. But as the death of the body was inevitable, they created an afterworld which afforded them a all too intent purpose, eternal and at times improved version of the life they had enjoyed in this world. But the vision of eternal bliss became blurred in the new kingdom, and even more so in the third intermediate period, as more and more people whose ancestors would never even have dreamt of an afterlife in a sunlit afterworld could afford to aspire to becoming godlike when merging with Osiris. So this is one of the reasons the Osirian cult was taking heavy presence. It was gaining momentum. You get what I'm saying? Doubts about a beautiful afterlife began to hunt people, and to some there became a place of gloom. See, we see that they were saying, wait a minute, spirits around here. What's going on? Where the dead existed in isolation and finally lost their individual consciousness. Understand that, family. The belief in a hereafter goes back a long time. Prehistoric graves containing vessels which presumably held food offerings. Some of the more elaborate tombs have been decorated with scenes from daily life, and some corpse even underwent a kind of preservation, as I showed earlier with the preserved body that was buried in the sand south of Thebes by E.A. Wallace Budd. And you can get this information from the book Hieroglyphopolis, Place of Discoveries in 1889 by J.A. Quibell. And you can get some additional information about him himself there at the Fitz Museum. So that's the book, the source, and you can get additional information about the author over there. So let's keep going. Next slide. The use of charms and their purposes. Hidden malevolent forces were everywhere in ancient Egypt. They could take the form of poisonous snakes, scorpions, diseases, floods, or almost any natural disaster, illness, or tangible foe. To combat and protect themselves against these forces, ancient Egyptians wore amulets or charms around their necks, ankles, wrists, or anywhere else on their body. Also, Egyptians used jewelry to draw attention to the more attractive aspects of their body and the less attractive aspects of their body, as well to camouflage, or as well as use it for amuletic jewelry, and it could serve as a double purpose. Let's go. So now, what we're going to see, family, what was this needed for so much equipment? What were they really scared of? What was they trying to protect themselves from? See, we understand they said they was protecting themselves from any tangible foe, but give us an example, Jesus. We want an example of what kind of tangible foe or what kind of power were these people aware of that could harm them that they wanted to protect themselves from. So let's see. So what I'm going to do right now is play this video just to see what kind of power that the people will wear these amulets and protect themselves from. Why would they want to wear it? Let's see. So I'm going to play this video and we're going to see. Let's go set the mic and play the video.
Executes the will of the gods. We call this the place of the Dan, the sacred python. It's an area nobody goes to. Cosme does much of his work here. He's a sorcerer, or Chakatu. People come to him if they want their enemies to be cursed with illness or even death. He executes the will of the gods. Cosme's energy is channeled through his assistant Dadahu. He's a celibate. A Chakatu can talk a living thing dead. This chicken stands for one of Cosme's human victims who is far away. Cosme knows through the tongue of the chicken whether the victim has been killed or not.
So family, as we see here, the power of sorcery is very real. This is the power that these people were trying to protect themselves from. This is why they will wear these amulets, to protect themselves against anything, against any tangible foe, anything. This is why they were wear these. Anything that had to do with that. Let's keep going. As we see here, you might call it spookism due to the fact that we have been westernized and isolated from the continent for so long that we simply don't understand what's going on. But as children of the Most High God of Israel, we are forbidden from carrying out such practices. Once you open that spiritual door, you're liable to let anything in, and good luck with closing it once things get out of control. Next slide. James Henry Breasted. This is from the book Development of Religion and Thought in Ancient Egypt. And in this book, let's see what James Henry Breasted says. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see what we got here. In this book, matter of fact, not to what he says, but what the information says that's presented in his work. I named it Say It Ain't So, because this is just unbelievable. This is the Berlin Papyrus, 16th century BCE. Understand? So that's 1500 BCE, family. Now, run out, thou who comest in the darkness, who enter into his nose behind him, who enter into stealth, his nose behind him, his face turned backwards. Now, family, what we got to understand is we're talking about beings outside of this physical realm. You're going to have to come to grips with this. This is from page 291, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to read what's on the left-hand side of the screen, and then I'm going to read what's on the right-hand side of the screen, so you know what's going on here. Run out, thou who cometh in the darkness, who entereth into stealth, his nose behind him, his face turned backwards, who loses that for which he came. In darkness, the dead were not at rest. They were active above all in the dark. Run out, thou who comest in the darkness, who entereth to stealth, her nose behind her, her face turned backwards, who loses that for which she come. Comest thou to kiss the child? I would not let you kiss the child. Now let's stop right here and go over to the right. Magic spells are in some way akin to legal writings. They are effective only against those whom against they are specifically applied. Using only the male form in a curse will leave the child open to attacks from female demons. To kiss the child, one had to guard against any, even seemingly friendly approaches of ghosts, because these spirits would try to kiss the child. And it was said that if a baby laughed for no reason because Bess was making funny faces at her. Now we're going to get into that. Let's keep going. I would not let you kiss the child. I would not let you soothe him. I would not let you harm him. I will not let you take him away from me. I have made his protection against thee out of effete herbs. It makes pains out of onions, which harms thee. So she made a concoction, as I went into earlier, family, a concoction to cast this demon away from her and her baby. So let's go. I made this protection against thee out of effete herbs. It makes pain out of onions, which harms thee. Out of honey, which is so sweet to the living man and bitter to those who are dead. Out of the evil parts of the edbu fish, out of the jaw of the meret, out of the backbone of the perch. Let's see, onions. Onions were widely used in medicine to prevent and cure disease or neutralize, i.e., neutralize the influence of the demon causing them. Honey. Honey was known to be a preserving agent. It was also widely used in medicine. Evil parts of the ebdu fish, considered unclean by many followers of Amen, were widely eaten by the populace. The smell of rotten fish, which might help keep people away, were also hoped to keep evil away. So they was hoping that the smell of rotten fish keep the evil spirits away. So they had no problem with keeping laying around. Let's keep going, family. Next slide. You see again in the sacred book of early literature of the East, volume 2, Egypt, translated by James C. Brest, the professor of Egyptology. You got Budge in there. You got all your big wigs in there, right? Peach portraying all of them. This work here is documented also in their work. So let's get to the next slide. This slide is dealing with ancient records of Egypt, historical documents by James Henry Breasted. Part 2, section 35. Now, let's see what this says, family. Once ancestors were seen as friendly powers in a world where one was beset by danger. Dying, they had left their offices, possessions, and rights to their offsprings. And dead, they protected them against evil influences. Their survivors repaid them by giving them a proper burial, perpetuating their names, feeding their cause, and protecting their resting place. Food offerings were made to the dead on a number of occasions. Amos the First erected a stela at Abydos. Amos the First erected a stela at Abydos. Enumerating them, excuse me, family, 1 second. Enumerating them, one spoke with the other, seeing benefactions for the departed, to present libations of water, to offer upon the altar, to enrich the offering tablet at the first of every season, at the monthly feast of the first month, of the feast of the coming forth of the Sem, the feast of the night offerings of the 5th month, of the feast of the 6 months, the feast of Hakro, which is Hakra, the feast of Wag, or Og, the feast of Thoth, and the feast and the first of every season of the heaven and earth. As y'all can see, I mean, y'all can here's the source right on the page. Excuse me. Excuse me, family. The acid down here. We got here the Theban ostraca. The Theban ostraca. You can get the source is right here. The Royal Ontario Museum of Archaeology, Toronto, and the Bodleian Library, Oxford. And here's the book right here. And you can get the book from the source on the page. Let's see what it says in there. And you see Alan Gardner. Get thee back, thou dead man or woman. Wait a minute. So we got a spell telling a dead man or woman to get back. Get thee back, thou enemy, thou dead man or woman. Thou dost not cast seed into his anus. These spirits were raping and having sex with people. So we see this back in ancient times. These spirits were doing this. And this is a curse to keep the spirit from doing this to a person. Okay? So let's keep going. Letters to the dead. What are letters to the dead, Jesus? What are you talking about? That's spookism. Oh, really? Like I told you, family, I don't deal with spookism. We don't deal with spookism. It's real. It's only spooky to the scared. It's very real to us. We know it's here. It's all around us. From the late Old Kingdom, about 2686 to 2181 BC, to the late New Kingdom, about 1550 through 1069 BC, there survives about 15 letters written to relatives who have recently died. Although there are so few sources for the practice, they range widely enough in time and in geographical spread to suggest that they reflect a broader custom of communication. They provided the most compelling evidence for the strength of belief in an afterlife. People say, y'all believe. See, Christians, y'all Bible believers, y'all deal with belief. Ain't that what they say? Y'all deal with belief. Let me read that again. They provide the most compelling evidence for the strength of belief in an afterlife or a life after death. Other practices such as mummification and rituals for the deceased might be considered social practice. Again, the mummy of Osiris, we're going to show that. Of the deceased might be considered social practice compared to modern church rituals as social norms, even for many non-believers. But the letters are at least appear more directly personal. Most of the surviving letters of the dead date to the Old Kingdom, about 2686 to 2181 BC, and the first intermediate period, and were found in or at the tomb. They are generally written on bowls with some examples on linen or papyrus. These letters never have just a simple purpose of keeping in touch with the dead. Instead, they have a practical and urgent motive and request help for insoluble problems for the living. The dead was treated and still very the dead was treated and still very powerful. A negative spirit of a dead man or woman could be responsible for whatever might be going wrong in life. Understand that, family. In the letters to the dead, the writer insists that she or he has treated the dead person well in life, and by maintaining the cult of the dead after death, and that there can be no reason for allowing ill fortunes to strike the writer. The letters all refer recently to deceased members of the family, husbands, wives, parents. Not ancestors, though. When we talk about ancestors, they're not talking about Horus and Khonsu and Thoth, and no, these letters are to more of their relatives, their ancestors, right? The ancestors of the people who write them. The letters refer to recently dead members of family, husband and wives, etc. The misfortunes that cause the letters to be written range from ill health to disputes over property. The dead person is expected to intervene in the afterlife, sometimes at the court of the underworld, to put an end to this problem. And we all know that's what's going on in the African spiritual system today. No difference. No difference. Okay. From their immediate family environment, and apparently with no person between living writer and the dead reader, the letters are among the most personal expression in ancient Egyptian writing. They include the first recorded messages of women from Egypt. Y'all hear that, y'all? They include the first recorded messages from women from Egypt. The examples from the provinces are among the earliest examples of writing in those regions. In 1928, Gardner and Seth published 8 letters to the dead from the late Old Kingdom, about 2686 to 2181 BC, in the first intermediate period. 1 example on linen, 4 on pottery bowls from the late second intermediate period, 2 on pottery bowls, and from the late New Kingdom, about 1550 to 1069 BC, 1 papyrus. Other examples of the first intermediate period on papyrus were extracted by George Reisner at Naga El Deir and have been published by W.K. Simpson. Next slide. So let's get into some of those letters of the dead. Let's get into some of those bowls. Let's see. Here's one letter considered the Hugh bowl and the Ka bowl. The Petre Museum of Egyptian Archaeology at the University College preserved 2 of the late Old Kingdom first intermediate period bowls in the publication by Gardner and Seth, A Letter from Quay, from a man to his parents, father on the inside, mother on the outside, and A Letter from Hugh, from a woman to her husband. Let's go. You see him right here on the what's his name? Diospolis Parva, Letters to the Dead, a widow's appeal for her daughter. It is the sister who is saying to her brother, the sole companion, Nefer Sefikeh, O great grief. Useful is a complaint to speaking concerning this which is done against my daughter in such an unjust way. Although there is nothing that I have done against him, and although I have not eaten of his offerings, and although he has not given anything to my daughter, all mortuary sacrifices are made for the enlightened one in order to intercede on behalf of the inhabitants of the earth. Therefore, make a decision concerning him who causes that which I suffered. For I want to be justified in front of the male and the female dead who is against my daughter, who did this against my daughter. So she has a complaint of a dead person causing some grief. And she going to her brother and asking her brother, big bruh, help me out, man. You over there in the spirit world, find out what's going on. Because there's some stuff popping off. So, you know, let's go to the next slide. Or let's read what's at the bottom. Soul companion, Samar Wa'etyer. Wa'etyer. However you would say it in ancient Kemet, my brother Uncle Keta, the brother with Yahoo, or brother Garfield, or one of them to say it better than I can. Sole companion of the king, a title enlightened one. Ankh. Body and soul, male and female dead. Mwetet. Dead person who might harm the living. We might refer to them as ghosts or spirits. Understand that, family.